Later on tonight, a new show in which a mystery presenter reveals his favourite marsupial. And although we can't tell you who will be presenting, I can say that he is super smashing, and he loves looking at things you could have won. Bully for him. That's later in tonight's episode of Jim Bowen's Favourite Marsupial. Anyway, that's coming up right after the final episode in the current series of the 80s Nostalgia podcast. This week's guest is a man so 80s, he genuinely owns a DeLorean. Former Gadget Show TV presenter and retro tech lover, Jason Bradbury.
So how old were you at the start of the 80s?
So in 1980, I was 11. So it was absolutely my decade in terms of like kind of coming of age, kind of teen years, you know.
And were you a fan of school?
Yeah, I was a fan of school, I suppose. I did well at school. I failed my 11 plus, and so all the pressure was off. And I just had a good time. Favourite subject was computing on BBC Micros and English.
And did you play any musical instruments at all at school?
I used to mess around on the keyboards and stuff, but I didn't have access to anything like they do now. Like, I mean, God, you could just get an iPad now, couldn't you, and record a track? And I used to do mixing. Like, my instrument really, I suppose, was the decks. I used to do scratching and mixing, and then I'd do I started out mixing tape to tape, trying to cut up tracks using tape to tape, and then I learned to scratch and got my first belt drive Technics, and then eventually upgraded to a direct drive Technics and did all that sort of stuff. But although I never became a DJ in the true sense. I used to DJ at parties and things, but I was never that good at it. I just loved doing it. One of my best mates was a really good DJ and actually ended up in the World DJ Championships. And he ended up forming a group called Utah Saints, which you might know. And I had his first decks, and then he got 1200s. That's the direct drive deck that most DJs used in the 80s. And he was much more serious about DJing than I was.
Was that the sort of thing that you're looking at going into when you were young?
Yeah, music and entertainment was the kind of thing I was really interested in. Like, I used to do loads of plays and stuff.
And you mentioned BBC Micro as well. Is that all you had access to at school? Because we didn't have a big range of computers at all. I think we had 6 BBCs and then 1 Archimedes, and that was it for the school. Yeah,
it's nuts. We had about 6 BBCs from memory, and that was it. Yeah, and that was remarkable. They were coveted. Everyone thought they were absolutely extraordinary and exotic alien intelligence things sat in the corner of the room. And then, of course, I got a ZX Spectrum myself, and I had a Commodore 64, I think, at one point. I had a lot of computers and that because my dad was into electronics, and he used to work in a plastics factory, so they'd get prototypes from the early age of the electronics that he'd be looking to get business for. So I ended up with calculators and different computers and joysticks and all kinds of things.
Did you ever learn to program? Did you ever write anything yourself?
A little bit, but nothing really meaningful. That's the only thing I regret, really, is not spending more time learning to program, because I feel like I'm a bit deficient in that area.
Yeah, me too. I typed a lot of the listings in from magazines, but I never actually compiled anything myself. And I wish I'd got into that. Yeah,
it was, and the thing is as well, it was much easier back then because it was so much more rudimentary. So you could do something quite useful without, spending months doing it. Whereas now, God, on the one level, it's easy to access for kids with like GUIs like Scratch, so they can actually get hands-on and move icons around. So it's more logical. And you can also you can access hardware with computers now and get lights to come on and, little motors to spin and stuff. Whereas back then that would have been quite tricky because you didn't have access to the educational resources that you do now. So you'd have a computer and you'd have maybe a magazine that would come out once every 4 weeks, but you couldn't ask anyone any questions unless your maths teacher knew what they were talking about. There was no one to actually show you how to do anything.
And the closest we had to programming was on the BBC, we had not a mouse, but like a contraption on the floor with wires. You could program it to do a certain number of centimetres forward and a certain angle of turn. A bit like a big track, but with wires on it.
Yeah, I know. Whereas now, I mean, I've just been part of a Kickstarter launch for a product called PyTop 4. And you can make a drone out of this thing quite easily. I mean, you can make a synthesizer out of it. You can use it to program hydroponics. You can make they made a robot out of it with a really cool little like LED face and stuff. It's got an OLED screen on it. It'll stretch your desktop across 2 4K displays at 30 frames per second. It's got gigabit Ethernet, and this is like a 200 quid computer, for kids for like making stuff. Incredible.
So the 80s were a great time for toys. Did you and your mates have any good toys back then?
Oh, man, I had all the toys, bro. I had all of them. I had this. Do you remember the trick stick?
Yeah, the yellow one with the red things on the end.
Yeah, man. I used to love that.
I still got mine.
Have you? No, you've got a trick stick.
I genuinely have, yeah, upstairs.
Oh, stop that. I used to demo trick sticks at like toy fairs.
Did you?
Yeah, because my dad used to make them. Well, it's all a bit of a mystery to me now whether my dad made stuff or whether it was stuff that he'd got in as a sample. So when you run a plastics factory, people come to you and you might then pitch to make their product, yeah? So what they'll do is they'll give you the product. So Palatoy will give you the Action Man, or, a local farming company will give you like a seed tray for hens or something, right? And or a lorry company will give you a wing mirror. And then you take it and then you kind of backwardly engineer it and then you'll get back to them with a price. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had just random stuff, as I've just explained by my examples, random stuff. Right, from the first generation of Sinclair calculators, Sinclair watch, Sinclair C5, which I've still got in the garage actually. Yeah, Kempston joysticks, stuff for farming, stuff from aeroplanes, parts off lorries, parts off cars. Loads of stuff from Action Man because my dad used to make stuff for Action Man. So whether he made the trick stick, or whether it was again a sample for a pitch that he was involved with, but I was on it, and I was definitely at one of the toy fairs demoing it because of the connections that my dad had, and I was really handy with it. I can remember the movement right now. I reckon I could do it right now. Is it still, has the string perished, or is it still usable?
It's you can see the string. It has few kinks in it. I need to replace it really, but yeah, otherwise it's perfect. Yeah.
You can hack a trick stick.
How do you mean?
You can alter the weights in it.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I realised that you could actually bolster the weight at each end using blue tack, because for people listening that don't know what we're talking about, it's a yellow tube. And then it's got a red ball on one end and a red ball on the other. And inside each red ball is, basically like a little magnet, but it's actually just a piece of metal. It's not magnetic, but it looks like a magnet. But it's so that this stick, when you swivel it around in circles, it stays vertical, doesn't it? Because it's weighted. And so by altering the weight, you can affect its flight pattern. And that's how you would do cool tricks. Tell you what I did want, but I never had, was a Vector.
The little robot that you can control?
No, the Rally Vector.
Oh, the bike, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, man, that was incredible. That was like kit in a bike, wasn't it? But made by Rally. So like a kind of hybrid between a Grifter and a BMX, but with like a Blake 7 style plastic computer section on the boss tube.
I think I had a Striker, which is...
Miniature Grifter.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Mate, I had a Striker. You're 50, right?
I'm 45.
Yeah, you see, you've got to be around that age, otherwise you wouldn't be making those references. In fact, I'm amazed that you said Striker and you're 45, because you're 5 years older than I would have thought you'd need to be. And I never had a Grifter. I mean, Grifters were like, literally, you're like, let's get some farming machinery, let's weld it together, and we'll make a bike that is indestructible. But the thing I was really into was BMX. So I had my Rally Burners and my Skyway Tough 2s. You must get people on here that talk about Skyway Tough 2s, surely. You see, you could go black because that's a bit street. But nothing beats a yellow mag on a chrome or a blue frame, Come on, let's be serious. Stop messing about, you know what I mean? The thing is, nowadays, right, there's so much sophistication in industrial design, and I'm really qualified to talk about that because I teach product design at the University of Lincoln, and I've done for the last 4 years. And I go to design, effectively, I just go to design shows all year round, whether it be like CES in Vegas or some show in Barcelona, or actual design shows, And I just went to something called New Designers at the Islington Design Centre, where the students that I work with have been exhibiting along with 3,000 other design students from around the UK. And what's interesting is nowadays, right, you'd never build a bike with, even if you did have a twist grip on it, that wasn't modular, where you couldn't actually fit a number of different elements onto it. It's part of the design DNA now, You design in fact, you often design with that in mind, so you can sell on all these different elements and these upgrades, be it for your posh yoga water bottle or a bike, you know what I mean? But back then, you bought something and that was it. You couldn't replace it. I mean, they just weren't available. And not only that, but the actual infrastructure required to get goods and, around the world, replacement parts, and warehouse them and then advertise them. I mean, who wants to get countless catalogs for parts for everything you've got in your shop, which you then have to ring up and order? It's just, you got what you were given and that was it. And you then had to bodge it together, didn't you, really?
Do you know, this is the most in-depth chat I've had.
I can go much more in depth. The problem I have, right, is that everyone thinks I'm a numpty because I did the show on Channel 5. And it was always a problem for me. I'm a real geek, like proper geek. I'm qualified to transmit Morse code. I've got a license to build transmitters from the Home Office. I've got a pilot's license. I'm really geeky, and I really was even before the Gadget Show. But I also did this thing where I was really into drama and comedy, and I used to be a comedian and do clubs and stuff, and I was in a double act with David Walliams at uni, and so I had this kind of theatrical bent, which is ultimately why I did the Gadget Show, which, if anyone's listening, is the thing I'm most known for in the UK, at least, because I was kind of funny and confident as a performer, but also thoroughbred kind of geek with a geek dad who was like ex-RAF and properly, hands-on with technology and electronics. But the thing with the Gadget Show, the wonderful thing about the Gadget Show, it appealed to the lowest common denominator, and that was intentional. It appealed to moms, dads, and kids, and that was the great thing about it. But equally, there was a real tension with me on that show because I always wanted to go into more detail or do things that were more geeky. But for all the right reasons, they made me do more kind of middle of the road kind of content. But now it's quite nice because I get to, I've just done a thing on Instagram tonight, and what I was doing, I was comparing the vector display on my Vectrex, which, as you know, is an early 80s gaming console with vector graphics on a miniature vertically orientated CRT, cathode ray tube, against the emulation in MAME of the same game, the arcade original, on my Arcade Europe arcade machine, which is it's the ROM from the 80s, but it's MAME does its best to emulate the output, but actually it ends up being outputted, albeit in a 4:3 ratio, on a 27-inch LED modern monitor. But I was just comparing the two and seeing, does the vector display on the Vectrex actually do a better job, than the sophisticated monitor? So I'm really into my geeky stuff. I like getting deep and analysing as much as I can because I kind of get off on that.
When you were young, did you have home computer or a console?
I had a lot. I mean, my favourite was the Atari 2600 because nothing before or since really. Maybe Vectrex would challenge it on a kind of iconographic level, but you don't get more iconic than the Atari 2600, the woody with its kind of faux wood front, those lovely simple switches, no software selection of levels, just click that switch down to make it hard or click it up to make it easier, which way around it is. Love my Spectrum, Jet Set Willy. I loved the Spectrum because I don't know why. I suppose because it was British and it has a very unique style, doesn't it? Like you look at the port of a particular arcade game, like Ghosts and Ghouls or whatever version of that was on the Specky, and it looks so different, and also the rubber keys, the sort of like little rainbow design, the fact that it was quite small, you could program with it. It's just a bloody beautiful thing in it. I mean, and it's British, man. It's like, wow. I mean, how proud does that make you feel? But the Atari, for just sheer product design, you whack an Atari in any form onto a T-shirt, screen print it on a poster. I mean, it's just iconic, isn't it? And that game, that joystick, really, the only thing that rivals that, I think, in iconic terms, as the kind of flagship of gaming, is maybe Tato's Space Invader, like the blocky Space Invader, as an image. I mean, that the joystick, I don't know what to call it because I say gamepad now, don't you? But on the Atari 2600, it's just so beautiful. The red button and and I forget what colour they were. They're like a sort of yellowy colour, the etchings around the side, and then the black rubbery plastic grip. It's just beautiful, stunning.
There are only a few things that I would class as iconic. I think the Atari joystick, definitely. Pac-Man, Space Invader, like you say. Everything else is a bit generic. Mario, maybe, but everything else is a bit generic.
Yeah, I'd definitely say, oh man, come on though, wait a second, the NES.
The controller or the actual console?
Well, the console and the controller. I mean, God damn it. In fact, I'd actually say the Famicom. In the same way, totally different product design, but the combination of that is, I'm not great with colours, but it's like maroon and gold and white. And it's just so cool. But that classic grey and red on the Nintendo Entertainment System, the first gen one, and like you say, that D-pad, I mean, geez. In fact, the D-pad, as invented by Nintendo, is so iconic that you don't even realise it's an icon. You don't even realise that they designed it. Do you get what I mean? It's like the wheel. It's that good, isn't it?
Everyone uses it, yeah, but you forget it had an origin.
You forget. I mean, PlayStation, they borrowed it off Nintendo, Sony. I open it up to the floor. If someone wants to correct me on that, go for it. My Twitter is @JasonBradbury. So is my Instagram. And whatever your assets for this podcast are, let us know. But I'm pretty sure that Nintendo coined the D-pad. Yeah, I mean, in fact, they've been fundamental in so many critically important innovations in gaming, which and they're often quite subtle, aren't they? Like I didn't realize what Mario was when I was first playing it. Really, I didn't realize how important it is. Like the idea of franchising around those characters and having other games like Donkey Kong and whatever, and all these other games that spring off it. As a kind of marketing philosophy, as a kind of world, it's amazing, absolutely amazing. When you talk about iconic, you could talk about like maybe the VW badge on the front of my camper van. Maybe that's another thing, isn't it? Or maybe the kind of, I don't know if there's a watch at the face of a Rolex, maybe, or I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like in terms of things to rival the gaming icons, they're so pure. Maybe that. Spirit of something on I forget what it's called, on the front of a Rolls Royce,
I genuinely think as well the Game Boy, the original Game Boy from 1989.
Oh God, bang on, absolutely. Spirit of Ecstasy. That's the name of the statuette on the top of the front above the grill on the Rolls Royce. Yeah, the Game Boy. There's a thing. So can you create that in 8 pixels and still understand what it is? And yes, you can, because of the position of the buttons, because of the asymmetric nature of it, because it's got that little, if you like, that sort of dented corner bottom right, the proportion of the screen, that power button, the power LED on the left of the screen. I mean, the grill where the sound comes out. Oh, man, it's just beautiful. Gaming equivalent of a paperclip, isn't it? It's just so simple and beautiful.
Very much, yeah. This is quite an unfair question because you can't really ask anyone what their favourite game is because there's thousands and thousands of games. But which games did you play during the 80s? Do you remember any certain ones?
I played classic arcade games like Scramble, Space Invaders, Arkanoid, although that's a bit later. Things like Galaxian, Pac-Man, Frogger. Because growing up in Lincolnshire, I didn't grow up in like central London or New York or something. So what I had access to was the kind of games that they'd have down the local pub, or the bowling alley or something. And so, now it's difficult to distinguish between the games that I actually played in the 80s because I'm such a follower of retro gaming that I've probably played every classic arcade machine, I would say. So, it just depends what you say is Burger Time classic, Double Dragon's classic. But then my experience of Double Dragon really, if I'm really honest, is down on to consoles, isn't it? That's really where I've battled with those brothers trying to rescue that lady. Yes, I've played it in the arcade, but I haven't pumped coins into it like I did with something like Asteroids. You know what I mean? So it was the first generation, 80, 79, 80, 81, 82. That was when I was really pumping the coins in there because that was the only way you could find those games, really. I mean, I know that things like the 2600 were around then, but most people in the UK weren't getting access to them like they were in, say, Japan and the US. Having said that, though, I think between us, me and my mates, we had every major console going. ColecoVision, Intellivision, first generation NES. Yeah, I think so. I've had them all though over the years. Tell you what I've never had. I've always wanted a PC Engine. Yeah, not the first one. I think it was the second one, but it looks like something out of a science fiction movie, out of Blade Runner. It's called what's it called? There's a PC Engine in it. Oh my God, you should see it. It looks beautiful. It's on my Instagram because I was playing with one recently.
Is it the grey one?
Yeah, with the blue. It's got like blue stripes on it or something.
Yeah.
PC Engine Super Graphics. That is a thing of beauty. I think they only made, again, your listeners will correct me, but they only made something insane like 6 or 8 Super Graphics specific games, but it was backwardly compatible with the other PC Engine games. So you get lots of playability on that. But that's a console I would really, I'd like to own that.
I've never had a Vectrex. Every gaming event I've been to have been on Vectrex. Never actually owned one. And that'd been my dream console, I think.
You can pick them up for quite a good money now. You can. I got one I needed to refurbish for about £300, and then I kind of what I need to do. You can get a kit for them. I tell you, one of the things that the Vectrex is guilty of is a really bad hum. So when you turn them on, you get this hum. And so one of the things I like about the Vectrex is that I want it as almost like a background decoration, so I can do shots of my arcade machine or a console or whatever, or a cassette player or something like that. And then have the Vectrex in the background sort of diffused. The problem is, if I'm filming, it makes such a noise that it ruins all the filming. So you can actually get a kit. It's something to do with the fact that they soldered or mounted the chip for the sound near the power supply, I think. So there's a workaround where you kind of unsolder it. It's a right old job, but I'd really like to do it. It'd be very satisfying.
So you're quite geeky electronic-wise as well. Do you do a lot of building?
Well, I was a radio amateur, so I did my radio license. So you learn all about circuits, and in the case of the Vectrex, the likelihood that the potentiometers are going to get dusty and start to crackle and stuff, and you do basic electronics and building not amplifiers, but kind of audio circuits and things. So yeah. But that was when I was a lot younger. I've forgotten a lot of it now, but it means I'm quite confident in terms of getting a soldering iron out and taking components off and replacing them.
It's the sort of thing that I love watching on YouTube. People like Retro Man Cave, who does a lot of repairing work on his old consoles. I've just not got the confidence to open it. Whenever I open something, I can never put it back together again in the right way.
Yeah, you need a lot of patience for it. I mean, I'd rather pay someone else to do it now. There is an adage for life, which is that, in your first stage of business, you can't afford to pay someone else to do it. And then your second, more mature stage of business, you can't afford to not let someone do it. and I'm like that stage. Like, I want to create and think and strategize and organize. And then I want the actual graft to be done by someone else who's better equipped to do it and who can do it more cost effectively. So in the first few years of the Gadget Show, it was a bit like that. I would be making all of the stuff that we did, all the builds that I used to be well known for. So the hoverboard, or that we made like a crazy steampunk coffee machine, or a mind control interface for a PC, which used the galvanic skin response, which is quite a clever way of doing mind control, or a simple way of doing it. I'd do it all myself, but then actually, as the show became really popular and we were kind of pumping out the episodes, increasingly I'd get people that I knew to do the bulk of the build, and then I'd kind of do the last few. I'd kind of finish it off and stuff. And so now, like with my Vectrex, I'm going to do that. I'm going to solve that. But there's a guy where I live in Lincoln. It's a great thing about living in a northern town. A lot of people are equipped with the old skills, so you can find the guy that used to service TVs. Whereas if you're living in London, it's really difficult because those sorts of skills have been left by the wayside. Whereas this is a farming community, so people know how to mend things, And I've got this Sony PVM, which your listeners should really, really look up if they're into retro gaming or anything retro 80s. The PVM stands for Personal Video Monitor, and it's a type of CRT, a cathode ray tube TV, that was used by professional broadcast engineers to get a perfect picture and then adjust the output in these broadcast vans and stuff, like outside broadcast and stuff like that. Not only do they look beautiful because they're made by Sony and they've got that kind of Sony lovely sort of gunmetal grey kind of aesthetic, and they also are small because they needed to put them in OB trucks, outside broadcast trucks and that. So you can get 6-inch, 9-inch, 14-inch versions of these things, which is great, rather than a massive 22-inch CRT that buzzes away and drives your kids mad. I tell you what's funny about old CRTs, they give off a frequency of sound that is undetectable to people of our age, but is very detectable to my youngsters, and they can't even come into my office because of the noise. Yeah, and I can't even hear it, which is quite interesting. But the point I was going to make is there's an old Sony service engineer that I found on an industrial estate in Lincoln. So I took my Sony to him when it stopped working, and he fixed it. It took him a day, and he rang me up the next day. I couldn't believe it, and he said, "Yeah, I fixed it." But I'm probably going to give my Vectrex to him, even though I think I'm probably capable of doing the fix. It's better done by him, I think.
Stale smells up here often come from down there, and your carpet smells from your dog, and tobacco too. Well, Shake and Vac from Glade is here. It's all you have to do. Do the shake and vac and put the freshness back. Do the shake and vac and put the freshness back. When your carpet smells fresh, your room does too. Every time you vacuum, remember what to do. Do the shake and vac and put the freshness back. Shake and Vac in 3 fragrances.
What music were you into back in the 80s?
Synth pop, anything with a synthesizer. My record collection, which sadly, I don't regret many things in life. I'm not that kind of character, but I do regret selling my vinyl. That was a really stupid thing to do. So I've only got one big record box left now. I don't have it, and I regret that. But it's full of things like Depeche Mode and Yazoo, Human League, and then loads of street sounds like that amazing Morgan Khan record label where he imported all these early electro, hip hop, and breakdance beats, and lots of electro funk and soul. That's my sort of thing. Anything with a synthesizer and a drum machine, and that drives me mad. In fact, I used to collect vintage synthesizers. I had a really amazing collection, which had I not sold them off because we moved house and we kind of needed to get rid of stuff, and that was a dumb idea as well, selling those. I had a Jupiter 8, I had a Jupiter 4, a System 100 modular system from Roland. I had a Pro 1, which is what Vince Clarke from Depeche Mode and Yazoo used to use. But now I've just got an SH-101, the lovely little red 80s analog synth, single voice, sort of monophonic. It's brilliant. I love it. And then I've got a modern analog synthesizer by someone called Dave Smith, who was behind a lot of the synths in the 80s. It was like Bob Moog, I think it's the correct pronunciation of Moog, versus Dave Smith. They were the kind of Nintendo, kind of Sony rivals back in the day. And I've got a modern analog synthesizer called a Mofo, and I use that in my SH-101 to create music. In fact, I just ripped a kind of version of Stranger Things using those two, which you can listen to on my Instagram.
That was fantastic.
Oh, thanks, man.
I'm a huge fan of music. I play keyboard. I can get tunes out of pretty much anything. I love keyboards. I love synths.
Yeah, they're just amazing, aren't they? Like this. I used to have a TR-808, a Mint Roland 808. You'd have loved that drum machine, but got rid of that as well. That's how I kind of fund my gadget obsession, by buying and selling things. Oh, I tell you what I've got. It's called a Circlon.
Okay.
Oh, do you not know that?
No, I know.
Come on, mate. Oh, because of course, if you're into synths and drum machines, it's all about the hardware. It's not about using a soft synth or Ableton or Pro Logic. It's about trying to create a track and run the track from beginning to end without using a computer. That's where the fun is. And to do that, you need a sequencer, which is why most people use a digital audio workstation, a DAW like Ableton or Logic. But you can get really cool sequencers. And I've got a rack-mounted one by a Scottish guy called Circlon, and it's like legendary. It's about 1,500 quid or something, and he makes about, 6 or 7 a year, and you've got to get your order in really early. And it's incredible. It's a step sequencer, so you can just output MIDI, or in my case CV, and then you just twiddle knobs, like literally just randomly, and you just get this boop, beep, beep, boop, boop, beep, boop, beep, 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 boop, 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 beep, beep. You can just mess with all the parameters. It's brilliant, really good.
Love that sort of thing. When I was younger, I had an Atari ST.
Oh mate, legendary.
I got a MIDI sequencer on a shareware disc, and it was a 32 track one. And the hours I poured into that over school, summer holidays and that.
Amazing. It's just the best, man. You can't beat it. It's like, people that have never done that don't realise how much fun it is. Like how you start with something just totally abstract and you end up with music that moves you emotionally. I mean, that's nuts, isn't it? That's like some weird voodoo going on there. And don't you think? I mean, I'll tell you one of the most amazing things I've ever heard. I don't know if I should even say this, actually. I think this might be secret, but let's give it a punt. Was I went to Dolby, and they were showing off the Dolby Atmos, so this sort of multi-speaker setup, and they had something nuts like 36 separate speakers in this audio suite, and they had the original recording of well, it was either the original or it was a re-recording, but it was Phil Oakey and the gang from Human League recording "Don't You Want Me," and they were all around you. It was like literally being in the middle of the room with Phil Oakey on one side, the girls singing in a booth on the other, and the audio engineer behind you, and you could just hear them all talking to each other and like trying different bits out. And oh man, it's incredible, amazing.
They had a bit on, I think it was VH1 maybe a few years ago. They were breaking down one of the albums. They got Simon Le Bon's vocal tracks and just his voice, and eliminated all the instruments, eliminated all the backing, and he was so pitch perfect. And bear in mind, this is like 83, 84ish. No auto-tune, completely in tune just from singing. Yeah.
I used to be in a Duran Duran tribute band, only for like one gig in Lincoln in the 80s. And I had a real problem because I was the singer. And I can't. I just got an okay voice, like a good sort of musical theatre voice, But I use vibrato, and I kind of use it because I kind of cover up how bad my voice is with a bit of a wobble. And of course, Simon Le Bon has no vibrato in his voice. If you listen to him, have a listen. I mean, I'm going from my memory from the 80s, so this might not be the case. But like, he wouldn't say her name is Rio, like with vibrato. He'd go, her name is Rio, like that. And you can see how bad it is when I do it, because it sounds like you say, you've got to be pitch perfect, hit that note and keep it. Whereas if you put vibrato on, you can cover a multitude of sins and you can kind of tune into the right note. You get what I mean? He is a phenomenally good singer. I'm pleased to hear someone else say that, because even at the time they got a load of flack because they were so sort of camp. But even in the 80s, like they're not really given their dues. Like, and not only that, but they're using the same synths that a lot of other bands were using. And I love the rawness of like Depeche Mode. But when you think about sonically, what Duran were doing was so much more exotic in a way. Like they were making almost sort of choral music. It was much more polished than a lot of bands at the time. Brilliant. I saw them live in London at XL, I think it was. It was amazing. Only recently, of course, in the last sort of 5 years.
Now, you are the only person I've had on the podcast who knows about breakdancing. How did you get into that?
Well, I was into all things synthy and electro and hip-hoppy, wasn't I? So it was inevitable that I've always been quite physical. Remember from the Gadget Show, I used to do like crazy cycling challenges and skateboarding and snowboarding and stuff. And so I was quite strong, and I could do things like, backspins and handstands and stuff. So I absolutely loved it. I was obsessed with it. In fact, I ended up, I was in a breakdance crew with my mate who eventually became Utah Saints. And we used to go to a place called Rock City in Nottingham and compete against these these other breakdance crews. It was really good. It was amazing, actually. I wish physically I could still do that. I can still do it, but I would tear something,
You're possibly the most 80s person I've spoken to.
I reckon I am. I mean, I think I am as well. I'm fully aware of how much I'm into it. I remember at the time being aware that this was unique. And I do think, I'm not going to make myself very popular with some people, but I do think the 90s was drab by comparison. I mean, the recent revival of 90s, certainly music, has made me realise how aesthetically profound it was in its own way, the 90s, right? Whereas I think I kind of missed the point, because in coming out of the 80s into the 90s, the 90s to a certain extent, was a rebellion against the kind of kaleidoscope of colour that was the 80s. And so by definition, it would feel drab. But I do think culturally, in terms of film, television, music, art, and obviously you can't get away from the fact that video games, and I know video games were invented in the 70s, but the golden era of video games is the 80s. Breakdancing, all of these are 70s, 80s crossovers, but in real terms, commercial terms, artistic terms, breakdancing, synth pop, and video games was an 80s phenomenon. I mean, I'm not unaware that some of the innovators of the music that I was really into started in the 70s, so Gary Newman and so on. But it was the 80s where they found an audience, and so and really so many decades since have sought to sample the 80s, not just in the literal musical sense, but in every sense. And now, I mean, I'd say for my daughter who's 14, I mean, she's just literally today had her hair cut, and she went into the salon. And she said, and I was there with her because she wanted me to show some more support. She said that I want to have my hair cut to look like 11 from Stranger Things Series 3. And it's a bob. I mean, so she's having a bob, which is an 80s invention to my knowledge. Or maybe it's not. Maybe it's a 20s invention. It's a bit Charleston, the bob, isn't it? But you know what I mean? It was very popular in the 80s. So I'm not saying the 80s didn't borrow from other periods, but aesthetically, culturally, it's just in a league of its own, I think.
Were there any films or TV programs that you remember back from the 80s as well?
Well, I mean, I own a DeLorean, so, obviously Back to the Future. But things like Breakfast Club, and I've got to be saying things that other guests you've had have already said. I don't know if I can say anything original, but in terms of TV, I was really into Saturday morning TV. Chiz was versus Saturday Superstore. Is that right? Saturday Superstore?
Yeah, Superstore and Swap Shop.
Yeah, Swap Shop, yeah. And that was a really interesting period. The birth of MTV, which was very interesting to be part of that whole kind of like part of TV history. And then the kind of science fiction shows like Star Trek, and I mentioned Blake Seven, all that's more of a 70s phenomenon. I liked all my sci-fi in the 80s, so things like Blade Runner and, Aliens and stuff like that, and Alien, the whole Alien films, and Predator, and, God damn it. Shit, man. Oh my God, what an incredible 10 years. I mean, wow. It's incredible. VHS. I mean, come on. Cassettes. Vinyl was 12 inches, so vinyl, I mean, God, I suppose vinyl's heyday really has to be the 70s, though, to be fair. I mean, that's really when it was, a unique experience. But, amazing.
We're back onto iconic things again now, aren't we?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I don't know, maybe we're trying to justify our existence. I don't know, like we're trying to prove something. I mean, I remember saying to Otis off the Gadget Show, God, young people today, like they've got no sense of tribe. They've got nothing about them that's uniquely them. And he goes, Jace, they have. You're just too old to know what it is. I thought that was a really good comment. And because, he's a modest chap, Otis. I love him to bits. Really cool guy. And he's right, isn't he? All my very posh Bose in-ear Bluetooth headphones are about to run out of power. So if you don't mind, I'm going to disconnect and go to handset. So my voice might change. Hello, dude. How's that?
Oh, that's a lot deeper.
Yeah, man.
So, is there anything that you were glad that we left in the 80s?
No, there was nothing about the 80s I didn't like. I had an amazing childhood, amazing parents. My brothers, were okay. My girlfriends were incredible. My friends were amazing. I was breakdancing, I was BMXing, I was skateboarding, playing video games. TV was awesome. It was just awesome. I loved it. But I've had great times since, I've had great times since. Like, I really enjoy being an adult, and I like having children, and I enjoyed being on the Gadget Show and traveling the world and filming and stuff. But, your question specifically is, was there anything of the 80s that you were happy to leave behind? No. I mean, even the awkwardness of being at school, I now remember with fondness, the kind of nerves or, getting chased or punched or beaten up because I was a bit different, because I grew up in a farming community. I mean, being a breakdancer in the 80s in Lincolnshire was like what I would imagine it was a bit like being different in Mississippi in the 60s or whatever. And I mean, I don't want to concretely equate those two things, but you know what I mean? I used to get bullied for that, for having a neoromantic haircut or wearing kappa or ticini or whatever it was. But I don't regret any of it, because that was fun. Being different was fun. I did it on purpose, and I still do it. I still try and be different. I say silly, funny things online at the coffee shop because I like conversing with people. I like their reaction and stuff. And I look for fun stuff to tweet and Instagram, in the same way. So no, I don't regret anything from the 80s. I don't regret anything. And I'm just really chuffed that, certainly my daughter is very much tuned in to what a unique period in history it was. She's really down with it.
And I see on Twitter and Instagram that you show off quite a lot of new tech.
Yeah.
You tweet things that you do, and you've done live streams from events you've been at. Talk me through what you do nowadays.
Well, I mean, Gadget Show was obviously amazing. Changed my life, made me famous, and took me around the world, and enabled me to buy a nice big house, and do really important stuff. So now I do social media, and I'm able to do it because of the amazing, life-changing experience that was the Gadget Show. So filming on network TV for 12 years, going all over the world, and that made me well known to people. So now I support myself by doing just my own stuff. So I've traded the kind of glitz and glamour and having stuff written for you and organized on the Gadget Show for, I'd say, a little bit more integrity, a little bit more authenticity, maybe. I don't have to do anything I don't want to do. I can just do my own stuff, which is important to me. I think as I've got older, I've wanted to kind of take a bit of control. And that's not to say anything negative about the amazing people that I work with on the Gadget Show. But like any job, I think sometimes you just grow out of it, don't you? And so after 12 years on the Gadget Show, I decided to take a leap of faith. And it's worked out really, really well. I don't do things quite as glamorous or as large scale as I used to do. So I don't get cover myself in rollerblades and, shoot face first down a mountain or, water powered jetpack across a lake or whatever. But I do smaller stuff. So I'll maybe go with a cycling company and do something up a hill and film that maybe. Or I've got a lovely, I can probably say it's a BMW, the new BMW, which has been lent to me for a few months. And I just do social content around it. So I get to drive around in a cool car. People that follow me on Twitter and Instagram get to see, from my point of view, a very honest depiction of what it's like and what it does. In this particular car, for example, you can move your hands in the air, a bit like doing a Harry Potter spell, and it'll adjust the volume or move the tracks or pause a track, and you can talk to it, and you can just tell it where you want to go, and it'll set the sat nav up. So it's actually really cool, and I get choice in terms of what I do now, which isn't the case when you're working for a large company,
And where can we find you online at the minute?
So my Twitter is still going, and that's Jason Bradbury, and the same handle will find me on Instagram. I concentrate more on Instagram at the moment just because I was quite late to Instagram. I'm still building it. I post twice a day on both platforms, and I do a range of content. Might be a Bluetooth speaker, might be a new pair of headphones, might be a little handheld gaming portable, loads of stuff about filming and cameras, cycling, cars, you name it. If it's gadgety and techie and cool, if it's a drone or some kind of weird underwater filming gadget, then I'll probably, get excited about it. And the great thing about Instagram that I love is, because I did try YouTube for a while, did loads of content on YouTube, especially during a round the world trip that I did recently with my kids. We just took off for a year when we left London and moved back to Lincolnshire. And I documented all of that in a series of vlogs. But the truth is that YouTube is a really labor intensive act, doing YouTube videos. So the quality that people expect takes an awful long time. Whereas what I like about Instagram is you're really, with the main feed, you're kept to just 1 minute. And so I shoot a lot of stuff on my phone, just edit it in phone and whack it on Insta, and they look good, because the phones I'm using, that we can all use now, are so good. The cameras are so excellent.
Just going to run through some very quick 80s related questions.
Yeah, yeah.
By all means, ask me stuff if you want to start a chat. I might be interested. I don't know. Never been spoken to before.
You've never been spoken to before? What is this? I'm sorry to hear that. We're going to speak. We're going to have a conversation, and we're both going to enjoy ourselves.
Oh, fantastic.